Nobody wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die. And yet death is the last destination for all of us. It's a quote from Steve Jobs. There's a few topics that we could encounter that will leave people speechless as much as death does. What do you say to someone that has just lost a loved one? I understand some people say, I'm really sorry for your loss. And I understand the sentiment behind that. But what does that really mean? You can't really be sorry because it's not your fault. Other people might say, my deepest condolences. Again, what are you really saying when someone just lost a loved one by saying, my deepest condolences? Doesn't really mean much. Other people might try to get your mind off of it, change the conversation, change the topic, get you talking about other things, which I could understand that. It's kind of understandable. Or the people closest to you might try to, take you somewhere to get your mind off what just happened, or bring you your favorite meal, which is kind of cool. I understand why they would do that. But ultimately, those that experience the death of a loved one are inconsolable. And in this passage, we see that Jesus simply comes face to face with death and says, I am the resurrection and the life. And this is what the sermon today is going to address, this face-to-face encounter with Jesus and death. And if you've been with us the last few weeks, we've been looking at some encounters that Jesus has had with different characters. We looked at how he came face-to-face with the devil, how he came face-to-face with a skeptic, with an adulterous woman, and today, how he came face-to-face with death. I want to give you a little bit of background about the passage that we're in right now, because I think it's important and it makes sense to clarify what's going on. This is the beginning of the climax of Jesus' earthly ministry. This is days before his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, where he is welcomed into Jerusalem by many. This is days before he will eventually be in front of Pilate and eventually get crucified. So this is the climax of Jesus' earthly ministry. But in the previous chapter, we're in chapter 11. In the previous chapter, we learned that Jesus barely escaped from being stoned in this town of Bethany, where Bethany is the home of Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. And the reason why he was almost stoned is because he boldly came out and said, I am the Messiah. I am the Son of God. Me and the Father are one. He said this to the Pharisees and to the religious leaders, and immediately they wanted to stone him. And they wanted to stone him because this was blasphemy. This was something, he was claiming to be God. He was claiming deity. So he barely escapes being stoned, and crosses the Jordan and is teaching in the same place where John the Baptist used to teach. And it says that many believed in him. So he's having success across the Jordan as he is ministering over there. Meanwhile, in Bethany, this family that Jesus was very close to, we read earlier in this chapter in verse 5 that he loved them. He loved this family. He loved Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. Jesus knew this family very well. He spent a lot of time with them. We see that he often stayed in their home. This is not the first time that he stays in their home. Matthew 21:17 and Luke 10:38 also tells us that he stayed with this family since it was so close to Jerusalem. But we learn that Lazarus becomes ill, and we're not told what kind of illness it is. We're not told the severity of it, but we know that it's severe because Mary and Martha sent a messenger to find Jesus. And they sent a messenger to find Jesus and to bring him back so that he could possibly heal his brother. But what happens? Jesus, like I said, he is having some success across the Jordan. Many people are believing in him. And he also says, you know, this sickness will not lead to death. This sickness will lead to the glory of God the Father and his Son. So he has a plan. He knows what he's doing. So he stays behind 2 days. But then after 2 days, he says, let's go back. Let's go back to our brother Lazarus. But his disciples say to him, are you crazy? We were just there and you were almost stoned to death. We barely got out with our lives. And you want to go back there? But eventually he says, yes, we're going back. His disciples believed that they were going back and they were just going to die with him because that's how bad it was the last time they were there. So this is where we at. This is where this passage comes into place. And I want to talk to you about 2 quick points on this passage. First, we'll talk about death. You know, what is death? How these characters play with the idea of death, Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. And then we'll talk about Jesus' claim that he is the resurrection and the life and the implications of that claim. So first, let's talk about death. I don't know if you ever thought about ranking Jesus' miracles, putting them, which ones are your favorite, which ones are the most impressive. But this one right here, I have as one of my top miracles. And it's a spoiler alert because we know that he's going to raise Lazarus. So it's a spoiler alert if you've never heard the story. But to me, this one is definitely one of my top ones when it comes to ranking Jesus' miracles. You might say, well, you know, it's pretty impressive what he's done throughout his ministry. You know, he fed a crowd of people with a couple of bread and a couple of fish. So that's pretty incredible. And I agree, that is pretty incredible. But I remember growing up as a hungry teenager, going home, opening the fridge. There's nothing there. There's nothing in the cabinets. And I go, Mom, there's no food to eat. And the same kitchen and the same fridge, she goes in a few minutes and comes out with a banquet of food, delicious food. So not to the same extent, but she did feed us hungry children with apparently nothing in the kitchen. Or you might say, listen, walking on water, man, that was pretty cool. So that's one of my favorite. And I said, yeah, that is pretty cool, walking on water. But technically, we kind of have a sport for that, you know. It's called like water skiing. And there's this cool lizard that actually runs on water. I don't know if you've ever seen it. So that's kind of cool too. And then you have all the miracles of him healing the blind and the different illnesses. But we have doctors and we have nurses and surgeons that kind of do this all the time, right? So I don't know. So that's why I rank this one so high, because I mean, we're talking about somebody being dead, and not just something that you could debate. He was dead for 4 days, it says in our passage. So what is death? Well, death is simply the end of life. The end of life. And in our passage, and if we study the scriptures, we know that death is even more than that. Death is the devil's number one chief or commander. In Genesis, we read that in verse 17 of chapter 2, we read that, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. So death is this overarching curse of sin. That is what death is in scriptures. And it affects all aspects of our lives. It affects our relationships. It affects our dreams, our goals. It affects politics, our planet. Death affects all aspects of our lives. We see how someone could be so beautiful today and then later on could be quickly not so attractive as the years pass. How someone could be a top athlete and then a few years later not such a good athlete. Or how something could be in style or something could be the hit and then a few months, years later is no longer. Those are the effects of death in our society, in our world. But if we go into our scriptures, we're actually talking about death when it comes to the ending of someone's life. We see that in verse 17, Jesus came and found that Lazarus was already dead for 4 days. That is a long time. 4 days he was already in the tomb. Now, this is not Jesus' first encounter with death. We know that on several other occasions, he came in encounter with death. On Mark 5:42, on Mark 5:42, yes, he comes into Jairus' house after his daughter had recently just died all of a sudden, and he heals her and brings her back to life. But some skeptics might say, well, that happened so sudden. How do you know that she was really dead? Maybe she was still, alive and with appearing to be dead, but not truly dead. Okay. But there's another account where he is entering a town and there's this crowd of people going to bury a boy, a son of a widow, and he raises that boy or that son from the dead. But again, it was so quickly or so soon after the death that you could say, well, maybe he was in a coma, but maybe he wasn't truly dead. But Lazarus is a different story. We're talking about someone that was dead for 4 days. I mean, there is no doubt. There is no controversy. There's no way around explaining what Lazarus was, which was completely dead. I did a little bit of research to find out what happens to a body after 4 days of being dead. And it's quite remarkable what happens to your body after you die. It says that within seconds, the brain activity surges and then stops. Your brain completely stops working. Your body temperature starts to drop. It usually drops about 1.5 degrees per hour until it reaches room temperature. Within seconds, that starts to happen. Then there's calcium buildups in the muscles, causing them to tense, which is rigor mortis. And this lasts about 36 hours. So your body becomes stiff and hard as bricks. Eventually, your muscles relax, causing you to release any remaining feces and urine. So you definitely could start understanding the reason why it smells so bad. Then your skin shrinks as it dries out, making your hairs and nails seem like if they're still growing. Then gravity pulls your blood down, making light skin appearance and reddish spots. And then within a day or two, within a couple of days, you turn green and spots because of enzymes in your organs that start digesting themselves, usually with the help of bacteria. It's not a pretty sight. It's not a pretty sight. Then you start to smell terrible because your decaying body releases chemicals like putrescine or cadaverine. And this is what the King James Version says, that Mary tells Jesus, it stinketh. It stinketh. It's a horrible smell. And then the last thing that happens in this period of time is within a week, maggots digest about 60% of your body within a week. So, as you could imagine, this is the condition that Jesus finds Lazarus' body. There is no doubt that he was completely dead. The funny thing is that we don't really know much about Lazarus. We know that he had two sisters. We know that Jesus was fond of him, and he loved him. But we don't really know if he was a good person, if he was, a leader, or if he was wealthy. We don't know much about him. He became famous because of what Jesus did for him. He became famous not out of his own doing, but about what Jesus ended up doing for him. But we do know that eventually he dies again. This was not a raising him for eternity. This was raising him, but eventually death will catch up to Lazarus. Now, let's meet this other character that we have in the story, which is Martha. And if we go to verse 22, we're going to find out a few things about Martha. Verse 22 of our passage says, "But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." Wow, that's a bold statement from this person. See, this person, Martha, knew what Jesus could do and that nothing was impossible for him. She just said, I know that anything you ask of God, he would do. So she had a good understanding of what Jesus could do. Also in verse 27, we find a little bit more about her. It says, verse 27, she said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." Amazing statement by Martha. Not only did she know what Jesus could do, but she knew who Jesus was. She knows that he was the Messiah, the one that all the prophecies were speaking about. That he was the Son of God, the one that came from heaven. That's a very good theology that she has. Very good understanding of who Jesus was. But one of the effects of death is that it blinds us from the truth. It blinded her from the truth. It blinded her from this truth that she had just professed to Jesus, that he is the Messiah, that he is the one that God sent. Because in verse 21, we see that she says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." So in other words, Lord, I know that you are, I know that you are the one sent by God, but I think it's too late. If you would have been here earlier, he would not have died. I think it's too late. Also in verse 24, she says, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And again, she's saying, look, I know that you are pretty impressive, but I think it's too late. I think we could all relate to Martha. We know the truth. We heard the truth about Christ, about the gospel. When problems come, when death impacts an area of our life, we kind of tend to be blinded by it. We kind of tend to forget what we already know, the truth about who Christ is and what he could do. So we could relate to Martha. We all have been there. Then we meet this other character, Mary. And Mary is Martha's sister and Lazarus' sister. Mary reminds me a lot of my mom. My mom is one of the most positive people that you ever would have met. She's always optimistic. She's always cheering and lifting people's spirits. But a few years ago, I lost my grandmother. She lost her mom. And I will never forget that day. Not because obvious reasons, it's the death of my grandmother. Obviously, that's you never forget that. But mostly because of my mother's reaction, how she was so different after the loss of her mom. She really just wanted to be dead with my mother when this happened. And this really touched me because I'd never seen my mother that same way. She was always so positive, so optimistic about life. But in that moment, she didn't want to continue living when my grandmother passed. And this reminds me of Mary. We see that in verse 20, it says that she stayed home when Jesus came to the town. She didn't go out with Martha, she stayed home. And then in verse 32, she has the same answer to Jesus when she says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have not died. But why do I say that she is so different? Well, we've met Mary in other passages. We remember that Mary was the one that could not get enough of the Lord. She could not get enough of being with the Lord. Whenever he came into town, she dropped everything and she would spend all her time with Jesus. On Luke 10:39 and 42, we learn that she poured this expensive fragrance in Jesus' feet, and she dried his feet with her hair. So she loved being with the Lord. She didn't enjoy anything more than being with the Lord whenever she got the opportunity to. But we learned that in this occasion, because how death has impacted her life, she doesn't even leave the home to go to the Lord, to go to Jesus. We could all relate to Mary because of the implications of death. It changes who we are. It brings side of ourselves that we don't really enjoy, that we don't really like to reveal to others. It brings negativity, attitudes. It just completely changes us. And this is what death does. This is the implications of death. But look at Jesus' reaction to Mary on verse 33. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. Jesus was deeply troubled at the reaction of Mary and the people that came with her. Why is this? Is it possible that Jesus was doubting himself? Is it possible that he was doubting what he could do, his ability? Or what he had previously said that this would not lead to death, that this was going to be for the glory of the Father and the Son? Because he was deeply troubled. I say no, that's not the reason why he's troubled, because we see in scriptures that he knows who he is, that he knows his place, and that he knows what he could do. So there was something else bothering Jesus in this moment. Jesus was deeply troubled because he knew the condition that Mary was in. He knew the condition that Israel, his people, were in. That they would eventually reject them, that they would eventually reject the truth. And even more, he knows the condition that you and I are in. He knows the suffering that we go through when we lose someone. He knows the brokenness that sin and death has caused into our world. And that deeply troubled him. Deeply bothered him. And in verse 35, it says, but Jesus wept. The shortest verse of the Bible. But it says so much. You know, Jesus wept because he felt Mary's pain. And he felt your pain if you ever lost a loved one. Jesus wept because he saw the condition of humanity. He saw the condition of the world that was around him. So he wept. You know, no other religion could tell you that God could understand you and could understand what you go through and has been in your situation as Christianity does. This verse, Jesus wept, says all of that. Jesus knows the pain that you're going through. Jesus knows the suffering that you have gone through. Jesus knows and understands and can relate to this brokenness that death has caused. So Jesus knows our situation. But I don't want to end here. Obviously, this is a gloomy message. If we end here, we want to end on a good on good news, right? And where is the good news? Where do we find the good news? How do we deal with death? How do we face death? Well, we have it right on our passage on verse 25 when Jesus says to Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. I am the resurrection and the life. Notice that Jesus didn't say, I could resurrect. Jesus didn't say, I have the ability to resurrect. I have the power to resurrect. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. That is powerful. That is a bold claim. And this is one of the 7 I ams that is found in the Gospel of John. And in our context, that might not mean a lot. That might not have the implications and the weight of what he is saying. But in their context, wow. They knew exactly who addresses themselves as I am. They knew exactly what Jesus was claiming to be when he says, I am. They knew that he was claiming to be God himself. This is a gold nugget for those that enjoy apologetics like me, because so many people say, well, Jesus never really claimed to be God. This is clearly a statement where he's saying, I am. I am God. And I'm telling you today that he is the resurrection and the life. And he tells this to Mary and to Martha. I am the resurrection and the life. You know, this is a common theme in the Gospel of John that is letting us know who Jesus is. John 1:1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. This is very similar to what happens in the account of creation in Genesis, right? In the beginning. And just like in the beginning, where the great I am created everything out of nothing, created everything with the power of his word, Jesus is saying the same thing. I am resurrection and life. And the condition of Lazarus, he was going to have to create partially Lazarus' body again. And that's what he's saying. He's saying, I am. Then he asks Martha, do you believe this? So I'm asking you today, and I'm asking myself, do you believe that Jesus is the resurrection and the life? Do you believe it? Jesus' resurrection doesn't just impact our future, but it impacts our now. Jesus was in the business, and he is in the business of changing the lives of those that he comes face to face to. And we have been learning, and we have been seeing in our sermon series that he comes face to face with these individuals, and he far outperforms our expectation. He goes beyond of what we could even imagine. And he changes far beyond what we could even imagine. And he's doing the same thing in this story with this family. As previous miracles, Jesus didn't just say, listen, at the end, everything will be okay. At the end, I will reign. At the end, everything will be fine. No, Jesus went into people's lives and he changed, and he drastically changed the lives of those people. He healed them. He fed them. He provided. He supplied the need that they had in that very moment. See, Martha wasn't wrong in saying on verse 24 that, yes, I know that my brother will rise again at the last day. But she didn't get the full picture that Jesus was going to change something today. I know that in this very room, death has impacted many of us. Many of us are maybe recently dealing with the loss of a loved one. Many of us are dealing with the death of our relationship, of our marriage, of our relationship with our children. Many of us are dealing with death of our dreams, of our aspirations. Many of us are dealing with death of our own bodies. We got that horrible news that maybe we're having a terminal illness. And I know death impacts all of our lives. But Jesus wants to tell you today that he is the resurrection and the life, not just of our bodies at the last day, but of your current situation, of your current conditions, of all the different areas of your life that have been impacted by death. Jesus is saying to you today, I am the resurrection and the life. We have to believe this. We have to believe this claim that Jesus is saying here. Jesus could still do miracles in your life today. He could still change the outcome of your life today. He could still give you new dreams, rebuild that relationship. He still does these miracles. He still does things in our lives today. Do you believe this? But also this story gives us signs of things to come. He was giving the sign to the audience of what would happen just a few days from there. A few days from there, Jesus was going to be heading to the cross. He was going to die, and he was going to be in a tomb himself. And this was a sign that ultimately they would reject him. And that ultimately he would be in that tomb. And just like he would raise Lazarus, he would raise himself 3 days later. Do you believe that Jesus came out of the grave? That he resurrected and he came back to life and he defeated death? This was something that Jesus was letting them know as he gave them a hint, a sneak peek of what he was going to do in a few days. But ultimately, what comes next far outweighs what we're going through now. You know, I remember the birth of our first son, and the labor pains. Well, I didn't have the labor pains, so maybe my wife could give you a better account of what happened as she went through the labor pains. We were about 22 minutes from our home to the birth center, and it was tough seeing my wife with the pain and the agony and the suffering she was going through those 22 minutes. Felt like the longest car ride ever. And she will tell you that when we got to the birth center and a few minutes later our first son was born, instantly she forgot about all that. And you heard the stories of mothers. They say the same thing. Their pregnancies were horrible. Their labor pains were tough. But as soon as they hold that baby, everything goes out the door. They forget everything, right? And this is similar to what happened with this family. And this is what happens a few chapters later. Chapter 43 says, when he said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Could you imagine their faces? I mean, their faces must have been priceless when they see their brother walking out of that tomb. Everything that they just went through, the 4 days of suffering and difficult memories, even the days that led to his death, maybe this illness was just eating him slowly and they were there trying to, alleviate his pain. But all of that immediately gone when they see their brother walking out of the tomb. You see, this is the same thing that we could experience and that we are expecting that would happen when Jesus comes back and finally defeats death. Everything that we're going through, all the pain, all the suffering, all the agony, all the brokenness, instantly gone. No more memories of it. Even the memories will be gone. Revelations 20:14 says, the death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. So the death is no longer. Revelations 21:4 says, he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain. For the old things have passed away. This is the same experience, the same instant gratification that Martha and Mary felt is the same or even beyond that we are going to feel once he comes back and he defeats death once and for all. Do you believe this? That is the question that I want you to leave with today. Do you believe that Jesus is the resurrection and the life? Let's pray. Thank you, Father God, for being the resurrection and the life. Thank you for your word. Thank you that although we might be going through some difficult times, although we might be suffering at this very moment, although we might have just lost a loved one, or we just see the brokenness and the implications of death all over us, we know that you are the resurrection and the life. We know that if we lost a loved one, there is hope that we will see them again. We know that although there's brokenness all around us, there's death all around us, we have hope that one day there would not be any more, that you will wipe all the tears from our eyes, and death shall not be no more, pain shall not be no more. I pray that you help our unbelief, that you help our blindness, that you help us, that you remind us of who you are, so like that when we're facing death and facing brokenness and facing all the different effects of death, that we could remember and proclaim with a loud voice, Jesus is the resurrection and the life. We proclaim this, we believe this, and I pray for my brothers and sisters, whatever it is that they're going through, Lord, I pray that you would remind them, that your spirit would encourage them in what you have claimed, what you have said about yourself, that you are the resurrection and the life. And that one day we would spend all eternity with you, full of life, forever and ever and ever. But that also you have miracles that you are still doing amongst us today. We just pray for encouraging, for you to encourage us and for you to lift us up and for you to do amazing things in our life. And we believe this in your name, in the Son's name, in Jesus' name. We pray this. Amen.